Fever, cough, congestion. When the symptoms keep coming, but you've got to keep going, you can rely on Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One. Just one dose of Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One relieves up to 9 cold and flu symptoms, helping you get on with your day. Need cold and flu relief? Get Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One and Done Relief. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
Dive into a twisted 90s spy thriller in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 on October 25th. Black Ops is back with a cinematic single-player campaign, best-in-class multiplayer, and the return of round-based zombies. Get exclusive benefits with a Premium Vault Edition. You get great perks like the Mastercraft Weapon Collection and the Gobblegum Pack for the Zombies mode. Call of Duty Black Ops 6, available now.
Rated M for mature.
Hi there and welcome to the Byline podcast with me, Adrian Goldberg. This time beginning our coverage of the US election 2024, an election which is increasingly being characterised as not just Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, but that of democracy versus authoritarianism. So we're going to talk about Trump, Maga and the F word. Fascism. Now, those of us reared on a great British sitcom, the young ones will be wary of the F word. It was used by left-wing sociology student Rick, played by Rick Mail, who essentially employed it to denigrate anyone he disagreed with. Fascism in Germany, under the guise of National Socialism, also led to the gas chambers and the death camps, so it is a word to be treated with extreme caution. It has nevertheless crept into the lexicon of this election, and Byline Times regular Heidi Siegmund Cuda is not shy of wielding this heavy word. We'll be hearing from Heidi shortly. But first, a flavour, in case you missed it, of Trump's pre-election rally at Madison Square Garden in New York. Hillary Clinton compared it to a pro-America rally held by Adolf Hitler at the same venue in 1939. Are those comparisons going too far? Judge for yourself. This is a selection of Trump and friends from the event.
9 days from now will be Liberation Day in America. It's going to be Liberation Day. On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history. Going to get the criminals out. And we will put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail. Going to kick them the hell out of our country as fast as possible. Is the fake news hearing that? Whoa! Look how much. Wow, that's a lot of fake news. That is a lot of fake news. Look at that. Isn't her egregious hurricane response the worst response in North Carolina and other states? You know why? They spent their money on bringing in illegal migrants, so they didn't have money for Georgia.
Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country. This election has to be more than a victory. It needs to be a landslide. We need to slaughter this other people.
America is for Americans and Americans only.
The whole party, a bunch of degenerates, lowlives, Jew haters, and lowlives. Every one of them. Homeless and veterans, Americans, sleeping in their own feces on a bench in Central Park. But the illegals, they get whatever they want, don't they? I get back and they go, Sid, you want to speak at this MSG thing? I go, sure. Out of character for me to speak at a Nazi rally. I was just in Israel, but I took the gig.
Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. And these Latinos, they love making babies too. Just know that. They do. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country.
But the last thing we're going to fix, and it's a big one, You see, I got 3 kids. They're all boys. And I'll be damned if you're going to have some school tell my boys that they can now be girls. Not on my watch. Not on the watch of Donald Trump, I can promise you that.
So snippets there of Donald Trump's recent pre-election rally at Madison Square Garden in New York. Let's hear now from Heidi Siegmund Cuda. Heidi is the co-host and producer of the RADICALIZED Truth Survives podcast, an investigative show about disinformation and radicalization. And Heidi, I'm just conscious that when we hear the word fascism, many of the people who support Donald Trump would not remotely think of themselves as fascists, or indeed of Donald Trump as a fascist. They simply regard themselves as patriots.
I think you're so right that the people in what I describe as the Maga cult think of themselves as patriots. Just like the National Socialists thought they were patriots, and the way Mussolini's farmers thought they were patriots. They believed they were saving the sanctity of their country and their women from hordes of outside forces. Let's first remind people what fascism is, because I think they get stuck on that word. It's a centralized government under a dictatorial leader that suppresses the opposition. I think of it currently in Vladimir Putin's Russia, Viktor Orban's Hungary, who wield control in that fascist way. And of course, we've seen it throughout history, Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. And I just want to remind people, because we have a terrible case of amnesia. Trump is using words like vermin. He's promising to round up 15 million people. He praises strong men. And I think this is very important. He deploys racist fake news on a population. And that news is designed to instill fear. And enough lies like that are what causes people to overthrow their own democracy. MAGA cult members don't know they're foot soldiers of fascism. It's 100% correct that they believe they're patriots. They don't know they're being used to overthrow their own country, despite the fact that we are living in a post-January 6th world.
Fear of the other has been mobilized by right-wing governments and right-wing parties, certainly here in Europe. You can point to the Conservative Party here in the UK, which in some cases does have links to Trump's Republican Party. Some people might regard that as extremely distasteful, might even regard it as racist. I would certainly say some of the rhetoric of the last Conservative government, the likes of Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, used language and dog whistles that I would unhesitatingly describe as racist. It's not quite the same as fascist, though, is it? What's the difference here?
I fear we're going to be debating semantics while we're being marched off to the camp. Again, Trump is saying he's going to round up 15 million people. That is genocidal language. And so whether people want to call it fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, what it is something that we've seen before, and we do have history to inform us. And one thing that I think is really important, we have an extra layer of problematic, because Trump in America is a professional propagandist who misuses words and denigrates the meaning of words all the time. And Jason Stanley calls this undermining propaganda. It's like there's a battle for truth in this time of grave deception, and we need to return words to their original meaning and intent. And Trump is using a cruel and effective playbook that comes right out of the 1930s Germany to overthrow democracy. And my fear is that we're going to be debating fascism versus authoritarian versus whatever, while we're already beyond the point where we can get back or pull away from it. I'm worried about that. Perhaps it's me. I've been studying so much German history right now, the last winter of the Weimar Republic, and note for note, we can match the timeline on what we're seeing here. And I do view this, and it's not me. I'm talking about the greatest scholars of our time, Jason Stanley. He ticks everything off the list with Trump in his book, How Fascism Works, returning people to a mythic past, using propaganda, using sexual anxiety, using othering of a tiny percentage of the population to throw everybody into a fear frenzy. the very first March 8 years ago, I held up a sign saying, "We do not accept a fascist America." And maybe because I'm German American, I'd grown up reading the history. I feel the parallels are too stark to ignore them.
Given that we are being careful about words, so that nobody has used reference to camps yet, but of course, neither did Hitler in 1933 or 1939. It is a fact of recent political history, though, isn't it, that Donald Trump has promised that if re-elected, he would kick out millions of people who he says are living illegally in the United States, a number that has been estimated at somewhere between 11 and 15 million people. And he'll use an act which goes back to the 18th century, the Alien Enemies Act, to make these. So he is talking about mass deportations, about primarily non-white people, about migrants living, in many cases, working in the United States, whose status may be subject to legal dispute, and that's why we have legal systems. But he's not talking about some kind of legal dispute with these people. He is talking about them in the crudest terms, about kicking them out.
And he is talking about doing it at such a level where there's no way to enact something like that without harming people, without the potential of deaths. And keep in mind, this is a man who's continually telling us he's going to seek revenge on his enemies. And we only have to look at what happens to reporters, for example, in these regimes. Look at Orban's Hungary and what's happened to the free press in Hungary. It doesn't exist anymore. The media literally was encouraged to donate their companies to the state-run organization, the state-run government. So again, he uses language that I can only interpret as genocidal when you're talking about rounding up people, but he's also telling us he will seek revenge on his enemies. And I don't know how much more strongmen you can actually get than that type of language. And again, using words like vermin, I mean, I don't think we want to wait to hope for a better outcome or a better version of this man telling us what he's going to do to his enemies and telling us what he's going to do to people who are here in our country today. And I just want to say, I believe America is a multiracial democracy in the process of succeeding. And I think that he is telling us that he's going to go back to this mythic past. And the dog whistle in that for me is the white mythic past, because he's telling us he's going to be rounding up people of colors. It's very brutal language.
Yeah, if people are not sure about this, by the way, and want to question this, want to go and check out for themselves, which you'd always encourage people to do, then he did give an interview with Time magazine in May, in which he said he would target 15 to 20 million people who he said are living illegally in the United States, how he would deport them, what he might do if those people sought to resist or invoke their legal rights. Well, we can only leave that to our imagination, or maybe not if Trump is re-elected. One of the features of fascism, and I've also spoken to Jason Stanley on this podcast, and I would recommend people go back to have a listen to that episode as well. It's incredibly enlightening and alarming. One of the features of fascism is the control of the media, suppression of opposition voices. And you've used the word techno-fascism, Heidi, in relation to one of Trump's great supporters, Elon Musk, who runs X, a platform which we at Byline use to promote this podcast, to promote the Byline Times, which I always find problematic. But sadly, X is very important as a means of distribution of the word that we're trying to spread about some of this stuff. But there we go. That's the reality, and we can't deny that. But tell me what you understand by techno-fascism and the role of Musk in particular, and X in particular, in amplifying Trump's voice.
I love the recent work by the Byline team on X marks the spot, because I just thought, how true is that from every angle? So All the internet is, in my mind, at this point, is a new weapons delivery system. And I wrote about the cult of the genius tech bro and how people were so dazzled by these shiny boys and their vast wealth that I think they missed the societal impacts. And Elon Musk, in his acquisition of Twitter, changed the algorithms to boost his own posts. I'm sure that you may have noticed suppression of some media voices and popular voices. My account has dwindled down to very little interaction, and I was a pretty popular pro-democracy journalist on the platform for a long time. And obviously, what we're seeing, I think, is authoritarian control of the media. And that is what I would call techno-fascism. And it's not just social media. In America, in the last few days, billionaires who own the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, tech billionaires, refused to endorse the only non-convicted felon in the presidential race, much against the dismay of their own editorial staffs.
Yeah, let me just say on that one, for example, the Washington Post, the editor had made it clear that she wished to endorse Kamala Harris. That was squelched by the proprietor. The editor of the Washington Post has now resigned as a result of that. So again, there is evidence of editorial independence, which is valued, I think, even more in the United States than it is here in the UK, although in both countries much play is made about it. But certainly in the United States, it is a really important freedom, and that is visibly being squashed in the run-up to this election.
Yeah, if you're not terrified now, I don't know what else would. I mean, this is a big deal. And again, this is tech related. This is part of that authoritarian creep that we've been talking about. And I just want to say that this is another important piece of this. We have J.D. Vance, who is running for vice president alongside Donald Trump. And J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel, who started PayPal with Elon Musk, they fund a social media platform called Rumble. And all day long, Rumble promotes what can only be seen as Russian propaganda, RT being one of the sites that is platformed on Rumble. And that, to me, again, we now have our three-letter agencies saying covert influence operations is not journalism. Covert influence activities has nothing to do with free speech. And all day long on Rumble, you will see RT streamed to 24 million people. You will see all the influencers that we now know are being paid or had been paid by Russia because there was an RT indictment. They are still featured prominently on Rumble. They're featured prominently on X. And by the way, I think this is also very important. 2 years ago in Byline Times, I wrote about how Russian analyst was warning us that Elon Musk on his Twitter platform was sending messages for Vladimir Putin. Now we learned he's communicating directly with Vladimir Putin, as is Trump. 2 years ago, I wrote Musk is going to turn Twitter into VKontakte, a Russian propaganda outlet under the guise of social media. I think we keep seeing this, and everybody was hand-wringing 2 years ago about, oh, he's spending too much money, right? My podcast partner, who's a Silicon Valley technologist, High Fidelity, he called it a 44 billion PSYOP cannon. And I think that's proven accurate, because what did Musk do? He replatformed people who had previously been banned. He's built himself a cult of 200 million followers. If you don't see the influence activities on Twitter, you may not be looking very closely, but it is I've always felt we're behind enemy lines, and yet it's where we do the counter messaging to counter message this, and it's where we've met each other and all our allies. So it is a very important battlefield in this information war, and I don't think that can be denied.
It's interesting as well, and there's nuance here because, of course, we're talking about the suppression of free speech, and we have to be wary of not silencing views that we disagree with hearing opposition points of view. I think there is a difference between listening to those voices and giving a platform to what is direct propaganda for a hostile state. There is a distinction between those things, between hearing voices that perhaps some citizens may not wish to hear and hearing voices which are clearly those designed to undermine the democracy of the West. And to that end, Ofcom, which is the UK's broadcasting regulator, joined in with broadcasting regulators across the European Union to ban Russia Today from the UK in 2022. But it's not banned from Rumble, as you're making clear, Heidi.
And what's interesting is that my friend in Vienna, Dietmar Pichler, who's a disinformation analyst, just discovered through reading one of my reports that he can access Rumble from Vienna. And again, when something is banned, but a vice presidential candidate is literally linked to a platform that is still offering that type of influence, that's something that's very dangerous. And you made an amazing point. Up until September, we didn't have the proper words for this type of influence activity. But now we know, again, thanks to our US State Department, that Russian covert influence activities or any covert influence activities are not journalism. So that is why you have somebody like JD Vance and Elon Musk out there saying censorship, free speech. No, these influence campaigns. And again, RT, in an indictment that just happened in September in America, has been linked directly to Russian military intelligence. Employees from RT have been indicted for paying an American-based media company and its influencers millions of dollars. That is not journalism, but you can still find the work of these people and the company Tenet Media on Twitter. You can find the work from the influencers on Rumble, and that is a problem. That's a problem.
Indeed. And I spoke to Peter Jukes on this podcast. I'm sorry to keep referencing the back episodes of this podcast, but there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff written by you, Heidi, a lot of stuff broadcast on your Rad pod, a lot of work that you've done on the Byline Times and the Byline Supplement, and work on this pod where I've interviewed Peter Jukes about Tenet.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is out there if people want to explore it, and there's still insights that are mostly missing from mainstream media in this country and in your country, and I think they're so important. To that end as well, we've also on this podcast previously discussed Project 2025, the brainchild, if we can call it that, of a right-wing think tank called the Heritage Foundation, and it enshrines the notion that there is this thing called the deep state. Some politicians on the right in the UK call it the blob, and that the deep state is essentially there to frustrate the democratic will of the public. And Project 2025 calls for a massive rollback of the state in the United States. Thousands of civil servants would become unemployed pretty much overnight. Government departments, including those, for example, devoted to combating climate change, would be closed down. Abortion rights, which have already come under attack in the United States, would be curtailed, as I understand it, altogether. Now, we should say that Trump officially has distanced himself, but he has clearly been in bed in recent times, metaphorically speaking, of course, with right-wing Christian groups and with the kind of people who endorse and support Project 2025. There are people who believe that Project 2025 is in effect the secret agenda of the next Trump government if he's elected.
Yes, and Trump is not a reliable source when it comes to, whether he's distancing himself or not. He'll go which way the wind blows. And
I hope you're not calling him a liar, Heidi.
Oh my God. So when reporters actually got to work on Project 2025 and started to investigate what it was and read through the 900 pages and all of that, suddenly the Q factor, whatever it is, that's actually kind of funny. He distanced himself. But the point is, Trump is the avatar for this movement to gain power, right? JD Vance could be inserted in there and following out this mission should something happen to Trump, so they can replace it with the next avatar. But I just want to say, yes, Trump is sort of the front man right now, but Project 2025 survives beyond Trump if the Republicans get back into power. And I think it's incredibly important. I wrote a piece for anybody who wants to know more, Maga Hat and a Gun, which breaks down the essential things you need to know about Project 2025. But What it really boils down to is a recipe for the end of democracy. It's literally a playbook telling us what they're going to do, how they're going to dismantle our functional government. And again, this is what fascists do. And even former Republican leaders who worked with Trump and under Trump are calling him a fascist. So I'm just saying this is a perfect point to talk about what really looks like a fascist project. They want to dismantle the DOJ, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security, the Departments of Education and Commerce. They want to give the president complete control over the Federal Communications Commission, which is the agency that governs radio, television, satellite, cable, all of that. And they want to install, here's a key piece of it, conservative warriors through bar associations and state attorney general's offices, while eliminating dissident bureaucrats. And it goes on and on. As you said, 50,000 federal workers will be fired, social media surveillance, outlaw pornography, register teachers and librarians as sex offenders if they teach sex education, on and on and on and on like this. Does that sound like democracy or democratic governance? No, it sounds like something we've terrifyingly seen before.
It is being described as a wish list, the right-wing wish list for the Trump presidency at the very least. And we've seen here in the UK, particularly when Liz Truss became prime minister, how right-wing think tanks don't simply provide ideological ammunition. They actually provide the template for government. And we saw in Liz Truss's thankfully very short-lived prime ministership the disastrous consequences of what can happen when think tanks effectively get to run government. It's worth saying here that Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has got very close ties to the Heritage Foundation. This is the think tank that dreamt up Project 2025. The think tank, the Heritage Foundation, has got a guy called Kevin Roberts, who is the president of that organization. He wrote a book called Dawn's Early Light. Who wrote the foreword to that book? None other than J.D. Vance. So even if this is not the strict program for the incoming Trump presidency, clearly there are close links there. It has to be noted. And as you say, Heidi, Trump is by no means a reliable narrator in terms of what truth is in general and what truth is relating to Donald Trump as well, and his alliances with authoritarian regimes, most notably Vladimir Putin. Trump describing himself as the man who would be able to sort out the conflict in Ukraine, sort out the Middle East. Well, at what price? And who pays that price? Is it in Ukraine? Is it the Ukrainians who pay that price?
Oh, I look at our unwillingness to believe that it can happen here, but it can happen here. It can happen anywhere. We have this horrible case of amnesia about the fact that Trump worked for Putin in his first administration. And we know from all of the great reporting from people like Craig Unger that Trump has been bailed out over and over again since the 80s financially from people linked to the Russian mob. And that we also know that he was groomed as this presidential candidate by somebody that we call a great cardinal, Paul Manafort, who also did the same job for Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine and was paid $70 million through various Russian proxies. And I feel like we just have this lack of imagination and this unwillingness to really confront what we're dealing with. And if we were a different country, maybe we would understand what's going on. But because we're America and we believe somehow we're immune to this, that we just can't believe it could possibly happen here. And my mind is filled up with all of the historic reading I've been doing. And there's a reporter from the 30s in Germany named Bella Fromm, and she wrote a book about her Berlin diaries, and she had to flee the country in 38, I believe, and was not able to be a reporter after 34 because she was Jewish, and she stuck around to try to help people. But in her diary, when she fled to New York, she wrote, There are stupid and emotional masses everywhere who can be found to follow them, given a few slogans and some nice uniforms. There are men everywhere who would sell out humanity for their own personal profit. And I just think about those words because we're seeing these men who are willing to sell out humanity for their own personal profit. And we're seeing emotional masses everywhere who, given a few slogans and some nice uniforms, will do the bidding of those men. And so I just think that you started with the appropriate framing, the continuation of democratic governance, or this other thing that we've seen before, strongmen, fascism, authoritarianism. And that's what's on the menu in America right now, a week ahead of our election.
Heidi Siegmund Cuda, my thanks to her. And Heidi, in case you don't know, is an Emmy-award winning investigative reporter, a filmmaker and a best-selling author. And she writes the Bette Dangerous substack. She's a political columnist and US correspondent for both the Byline Supplement and the Byline Times. Her Hot Type column appears weekly in the Byline Supplement. And don't forget as well to check out her podcast, Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Adrian Goldberg, and if you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Byline podcast, don't forget you can support our work by taking out a subscription to the Byline Times, our brilliant monthly periodical which contains the best of our online work, but also content that you cannot read anywhere else. It's a great magazine. You'll get details over at our newsbreaking website, bylinetimes.com, and think about taking out a subscription. This episode of the Byline podcast has been produced in Birmingham by me and Harvey White. Thanks very much indeed for listening. We'll see you again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Byline.